Well, I'm Jessica Siders, and I'd just like to welcome all of you tonight at the museum at the Southeast Ohio History Center. We are going to get started. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Welcome to our fourth night at the museum. And this year we look a little bit different, and we decided that we were going to open up the wall so that you could see all the things that are going on in the building. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction and tell you how tonight is going to run. And after that, we're going to introduce our special guests who are here tonight. So for those of you who have not met me, my name is Jessica Siders. I'm the director here at the Southeast Ohio History Center. We don't normally look like we're in so much chaos with plastic sheeting and ram board everywhere, but we are doing some renovations, and we're really excited about them. So all of the things that you can see over here, we are renovating our stage and bringing it back to its original glory. So next year's night at the museum, the interpreters will be on that historic stage. We are renovating our entryway, and you can take a peek in there. You'll see some beautiful original floor tiles that we are cleaning and renovating. We're going to be leveling our balcony in preparation for a permanent exhibit. So that is very exciting, and that'll be installed in 2026. And then I'm trying to think what else we're doing. Oh, we're making our restrooms ADA accessible. So our first floor restrooms right now, if you need to use the restroom, there is a step down, and we really don't like that. So we're adding some ADA accessibility features to the building, and we're very excited about that. Speaking of restrooms, if you need to use the restroom at any time, we have one downstairs in the basement, which I know is not ideal. And if you feel really brave, you can walk through the reception area, which is behind a bunch of plastic sheeting, and then turn left and follow the plastic sheeting, and then step down, and then the restrooms are in a hallway in the back there. I'm sorry for the plastic sheeting. It just is what it is right now. But you can see the new, the beautiful original floor in the entryway while you go. So, all right, how tonight is going to work. We have 8 people from Southeast Ohio's history that you are going to hear from, and I'm going to call them up in order of birth. So our oldest person will be coming up first. And then they each have stations. So after they give a little 2-minute to 3-minute introduction, they will go to their stations. And then we have volunteers who can lead you to those stations so that you can hear everybody. Make sure that you get a card from our interpreters tonight. And some of them might make you do something to get a card. I don't know. I can't control what they ask you to do. So ask them a question. And they can break character if they need to explain something, but they will try to, for as much as possible, be in first-person character. So they will be portraying that person. So if you ask them about cell phones or airplanes and they weren't alive for that, they probably can't answer that question for you. So any other questions before I bring up our first special guest? All right, we're going to get some more chairs out. So I've got some lovely volunteers who are going to help with the chairs. Yes, thank you. All right. First up, all the way from the colony of Virginia, we have the colonial governor, Lord Dunmore. So please welcome John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore.
Is Misha Ieng Morar. Morar Dunmore. You all look like a bunch of Sassenachs, so I am John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore. I was born on Taymouth in Scotland in 1730. I was born to a family of lairds, and in 1745, I joined Bonnie Prince Charlie in the rebellion that would finally, we hoped, free us of English rule. But unfortunately, at Culloden, the government defeated the prince, and our cause was sent underground. We were punished for the rebellion, and I spent a few years in prison, but eventually I came around and decided if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. I joined the British Army and served as a captain in the 7 Years' War. We raided the French coastline, launching expeditions up and down the coast of Brittany, and disrupting their plans to invade. I resigned my commission after a few years of experience and took up the lordship of Dunmore after my uncle died. My next big move was to North America. I became governor of the colony of New York, and shortly after being installed, the governor of Virginia died, and in 1771, I became the governor of Virginia. This post allowed me a lot of opportunities to grow my personal wealth. It was a very rich colony and had a lot of subjects, a lot of imports and a lot of exports. But Virginia's land holdings were huge, absolutely massive, but we were threatened by the Shawnee. So in 1774, I launched an expedition of militia. I took command, having military experience of my own, fighting in 2 wars. I took command of one branch of the army, and I marched through this very area where we are now, and I went to the heart of Shawnee territory and managed to work out a lasting peace that granted Virginians use of the land and prevented the Shawnee from coming into our land to hunt. What gets remembered from this war, of course, is on the way back, when I had already returned to Virginia, the soldiers in the army began advocating for their own rights. And unfortunately, this revolutionary spirit took hold of much of my colony. And in 1775, they had the gall to run me out of the governor's mansion. We took to ships, and from the coast, we raided, and I proclaimed all slaves free who would take up arms against these rebellious colonists. Unfortunately, didn't work out so well in the long run. I don't want to talk about that. But I did all right. I returned to England, and after the revolution, I became governor of the Bahamas. So I will be available for more of my story later, but thank you all.
All right, next up we have one of those rebellious colonists and an early settler of Athens County. Please welcome Solomon Tuttle.
Well, I'm Captain Solomon Tuttle. I'm 268 years old this year, so you young whippersnappers, listen up. I was born in 1757 in northwestern Connecticut, and that was the frontier at the time. And what you good people call camping or roughing it, we just called living. And life on the frontier wasn't easy. Growing up was when the French and Indian War was being fought. So there was skirmishing going on, and some of the guys would go off and fight. And that ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. And at that time, the Brits thought we ought to be paying for that war. We were British subjects, and they started taxing us, and we didn't like that very much. And a lot of taxation without representation. And that got the rebellious spirit going, and we were kept informed by people out of Boston, people like Paul Revere, you probably heard that name. Sam Adams, he was a real rabble-rouser. I heard he made pretty good beer too. Anyway, they kept us informed, and when the shot heard around the world was fired at Lexington, that started the war. And within a month, we were ready to jump on us. And I went up with a guy named Sutherland and joined up with Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys. And we took Fort Ticonderoga. It was a strategic point on Lake Champlain, and had a bunch of cannon that eventually Henry Knox brought down to free up Boston. The British held Boston captive, and old Henry took 59 cannon down there and scared them out of there. Anyway, we went up to Fort St. Thomas in Quebec, and I wintered over in Montreal that year, 75, 76, and was discharged, came back down, and became a Minuteman for 3 years, became a Green Mountain Boy, and lived in what eventually became Vermont. Well, I started a family. 1779, I had a child and a wife, and some Indians came down with the Brits, and they captured us. Fortunately, they didn't take me, or they didn't take my wife and child captive, but they took me up to Canada. And the Indians had me for 7 months, and they turned me over to the Brits, and the Brits, some Tories up there told them I was a rebel and a rabble-rouser, and they put me in irons for 7 months, and then they finally let me out of that and kept me another 7 months. So I was held captive for a year and 9 months, never really recovered from that health-wise. But came back, raised a family, and Rufus Putnam was pretty persuasive. In 1796, we came over to Marietta. My brother, son, not the whole family, stayed in Marietta a few years. 1798, Rufus Putnam was pretty persuasive again. 8 families, mine included, came up the Hocking River. We rode horses, took some oxen, and came to what is today called Athens, built a cabin right up the road here. And I have to remind everybody, this was wilderness. There was nobody here. And a lot of bears, panthers, wolves, and this here was a necessary appendage. And it was quite an interesting time to be alive. In my cabin, I was a Puritan and not afraid to give sermons, but I wasn't ordained, and in my cabin was the first ordained preacher, a Baptist preacher from Maine, came and preached a sermon. And then Athens was getting a little too crowded for me, so 1802, my brother Niall and son Cyrus, we went up on Sunday Creek and built a cabin up there, and I was the first resident of what became Trimble Township, and died in 1830, and I'm buried up there. I'm really not 268 years old, I'm dead. But I'm buried up at the what's called the Bodenot Farm, just outside of Millfield. And that's my story.
All right, up next, we are truly honored this evening to have a renowned astronomer, ambassador, former Secretary of State, former member of Congress, and also the former 6th President of the United States, John Quincy Adams. And you may wonder what he is doing here tonight, and I am sure he will tell you.
Good evening. I'm Congressman John Quincy Adams. You've probably heard my name, but don't know much else about me. I started in public service at age 11 with my dad. He took me over to Paris when he was trying to cut some deals with the French, time of the Revolution. and he needed to send a fellow up to St. Petersburg, Russia, to negotiate with Catherine the Great, and the guy he was sending didn't speak French, so he sent me as an interpreter, and kind of been on the job ever since. Haven't held a job very long. This job as congressman's been my longest. I served a brief while as a United States Senator, and the people from Massachusetts duly fired me after one term. I served as ambassador to Holland and Prussia. Spent 5 years in Russia as the first ambassador to that nation. Served as ambassador to England. I came back after helping lead the negotiations for the Treaty of Ghent after the War of 1812 over in Belgium. I was brought back and made Secretary of State under James Monroe, and had a lot of work to do as Secretary of State. One of the things I did was write the Monroe Doctrine. Left his name on it. Then I became President of the United States, but I didn't get elected. Several candidates that year, and none of us got the Electoral College. That threw it into the United States House of Representatives, and they selected me, a distant second, after over Andrew Jackson, because they were a little leery about that general from the South. Anyway, I only served one term. They fought everything I wanted to do. Everything. I had a lot of detractors, very few supporters in Congress. One of the things I called for was the establishment of a national observatory. In Europe, I'd seen upwards of 130 of these things scattered across the countrysides. And in North America, we have not one. And so that's when I started trying to get an observatory built in America. Had no success. Spent that time in Congress, went home after, in the White House, and went home after serving one term. And went home to write my dad's memoirs, but the people of Massachusetts had a change of heart and they drafted me into the Congress, and I've been serving there for 13 years now. And a fellow from Cincinnati decided he wanted to build an observatory, and so he asked if I'd come over to help lay the cornerstone. So I worked for months on my speech. It was a 3.5-hour speech about the history of astronomy. Anyway, I came across upstate New York by train. It was an early train. Matter of fact, it took a team of horses to free the iron horse from the tracks that they were frozen to that morning. And I took that to Buffalo, got onto a steamer out on Lake Erie, took that across to Cleveland, and got on a canal boat, the Rob Roy. And I had spent about 9 years prior to this trip in Congress fighting the gag rule. That's when the southern states managed to get the upper hand, and they abolished the right to petition your elected representative. Imagine that. And I was beside myself about that, so I fought it. And I told anybody that had any petitions to bring them to me, and I'd put them on the table. You want a petition against your dog? Bring it to me, and we'll get it up. And I fought that thing, and they threatened me with impeachment, censure, and assassination. But we prevailed. And so when I got here to Ohio to lay the cornerstone of this observatory, there were crowds every place that the canal boat stopped. But they wanted to hear me talk about abolition of slavery, because that's what anybody was petitioning about in those days, was the abolition of slavery. And so I guess I had some fans in the Ohio country when I got here in 1843. Pretty primitive area at the time. Anyway, I took the canal boat down to the National Road. And the other thing I was big on when I was in the White House was internal improvements. Canals, roads, bridges, such things like that. Observatories and universities. So anyway, then I took the stagecoach over to Columbus and Dayton and stayed a night at the Golden Lamb Hotel restaurant down there in Lebanon, Ohio, and had a portrait done. Never was one of my favorite portraits. Anyway, the next day we got into Cincinnati, and I went up to Mount Ida to give my speech, but it was raining. I started speaking to a sea of mud and umbrellas, and the words were disappearing on my pages before me because of the ink and the rain. So we held off. I gave the speech the next day at the Wesleyan Chapel, and after an hour and a half, although I saw no one moving toward the door, I still thought better about myself and gave them the rest of the the transcript for their archives. And on my way home, I chose not to go back the same route. I headed up the Ohio River. And when I got to Marietta, Ohio, I disembarked and came into town and met up with Ephraim Cutler. He was the son of one of the fellows that got this region of the country first populated with the ordinance of 1787, Manasseh Cutler. And so I met up with Ephraim and a couple other fellows, Judge Barker and a friend of theirs named Emerson, and I gave some speeches there at the Two-Horn Church there in Marietta, and the crowds were so receptive. But, you know, they saw me as the last of the founding fathers, because everybody else that was part of that gig back 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, were long gone. And I knew their dads. So I noticed the handshakes there were even more firm than everywhere else on my tour. Anyway, when we were done with all the speechifying, a bunch of us jumped into some carriages and we went in to look at the Native American earthworks in Marietta. It was nice that that town decided to build its community around the earthworks and not wipe them out. Anyway, then I headed back to Washington, and that trip about killed me. It about killed me. I was 76 years old and had a bad cough, and man, it took months, 2 months to do that. Anyway, I didn't spend a lot of time here in Southeast Ohio, but I knew a few of your folks, and it was an interesting trip. So that's my story.
All right, next up, we have a woman who I don't know if many of you have heard of her before, but she is one of the founders of a college in Southeast Ohio. So I would like to welcome Mrs. Permelia Atwood to the podium to tell you her story.
Good evening. My name is Permelia Atwood, and I think my greatest accomplishment in my long life was the founding of Rio Grande College in Gallia County. That was a long way for a little girl to come that had been born in 1802, Permelia Ridgway, and lived in Gallia County when it was still part of the frontier. And I was very successful in business, education. Unlike many of the women of my time, I was even on the board of directors of the local bank. But it all started when I married my husband, Nehemiah Atwood, in 1818. I was just a girl, really. And we did not have children. We weren't blessed with children, but we had a very strong partnership based on love and hard work and ingenuity and ambition. We owned an inn. We amassed a large, profitable farm. We were leaders of our community, and we had great prosperity, actually. But somehow that just didn't seem enough. And in 1750, we met a young Reverend Ira Haney from the Free Will Baptist Church. He preached the gospel, but he also preached abolition of slavery and prohibition of alcohol, two ideas we were very in favor of. So we converted to the Baptist faith. And in January of 1851, we were baptized by dunking in the very freezing water of Raccoon Creek. But we started our new Christian life of good works and charitable donations. We helped Reverend Haney build his church. We founded the Atwood Academy in Albany, Ohio. And as the years went by, Reverend Haney had suggested to us, what if we founded a college of Christian and classical education near our home? And we were all for it. But unfortunately, as things happen, my dear Nehemiah was called to heaven, and some of his last words were, "Permelia, build the college. And I did. I was the sole owner of the farms and the fortune at that point, and I donated 10 acres of our farm in the southeast corner of our farm for the place for the university to be built, and I donated all the money it took to build 2 beautiful brick buildings, the college hall and the boarding hall. And I also even took my will and endowed my entire fortune to the college when I should die. So I am actually a member of the Board of Trustees of Rio Grande College, which opened on September 13th, 1876. And I have had a say in the hiring of faculty and the other all sorts of important matters. But you know what I really like the very best of all? I like to walk around in the campus and talk to the students. And they are so generous with their attentions to me. They call me Aunt Permelia, which is a true joy for me. So when I go to meet my maker, I will know that I was responsible for a great contribution to the education and Christian moral education of our people in our community. And I will pray that Rio Grande College will last 100 years or more. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you.
All right, next up we have another educator, an abolitionist, and feminist. And some of you who walk around uptown, maybe in front of the middle school, might have noticed a plaque dedicated to her and wondered, who is this woman that is on a plaque on a stone in front of the Athens Middle School? Well, I am very happy to introduce to you Mrs. Mariah Brown, and also known as Grandmother Brown. And she has come all the way from Iowa on her 100th birthday.
Thank you for coming to my birthday party. This is great. And so the year's 1927, and my name is Mariah Foster Brown. And well, I'm 100 years old today. I was actually 2 when John Quincy Adams and I knew each other. He was president that time. There aren't many people right now that knew John Quincy Adams like I did. But anyway, I got to tell you so much about my life, and it's a long life, so I have to talk really fast. And I'll tell you, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about it, my favorite part. So I was born in Athens, Ohio, and I lived just 1 block up the street from where we are standing right now. And oh, it was a beautiful place. It was so pretty. And anyway, we owned 1 square block of property and a house sat up on top. We could almost see the Hocking River, but couldn't quite, but we could see Bigman Mill. And the house had well, it was comfy. My mom said if she could do anything in that house, it was so comfy and big, and we were lucky in that way. And then it had a porch wrapped all around it, and then in the backyard, we had a orchard, and then behind that was the gardens, and boy, those roses were as big as doorknobs. And then behind that, we had the well and the milk house and the smokehouse, and then there was my favorite thing. It was the drying kiln. And my pa, Evan Foster, and he was in the business of making brick in Athens. And he came up our place one day and he set down a flagstone that was like 6 feet long, maybe longer, and he built these out of brick, his own brick. He built these legs, and we put that flat stone on there, and we put all the food, all the fruit from our orchards, and we dry it, and quince was my favorite fruit though, really. But anyway, so let me see, what should I skip here? Well, my grandpa, Zadok Foster, he was, there were Ebenezer Fosters and Ebenezer's, and then there was Zadok. And Zadok, well, he came to Athens and brought his family, and he started a tavern, but then he died after 5 years. And his poor wife, Sally, she had 8 children. So, let's see. So, my father, Ephraim, no, that's not his name, Eben, short for Ebenezer. Well, anyway, he built my grandma, Sally, a cabin with his own hands. He was only like 14 years old. And my Sally turned that into a school, a select school in Athens. And she ended up teaching years past what she should have been. And she was still really teaching at 80 years old, but anyway, who's counting? And then, what next should I tell you about? Well, then they moved here from Belpre. They just skipped over Marietta and just came right to Belpre. And Belpre was the most charming place between Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. Imagine that. So I was a little girl, and then I got bigger, and then all these boys were around, and I had 3 boys wanting to marry me. And not because I was pretty and clever and tall, and anyway, it was because those men needed us. They needed women to help them do everything that they were doing. So I married a guy named, his name was his name was Daniel. I'm 100 years old, remember. His name was Daniel Brown. And boy, those Browns, there were so many Browns you can't even imagine. In fact, his mama's name was Polly Brown. But they came down, they were all mixed up with the Putnams and the Ewings and all that. And they came and they settled in They settled in Ames. And then they moved to Albany. And then they moved to Athens, and then they moved back to Ames. But anyway, Ames was quite a pleasant place, as you know. There was the Prudskin Library and all those people, the Cutlers, and everybody I was telling you about. Well, anyway, Evan Brown, Daniel Brown, he was my love of my life, but I could get his name mixed up once in a while. But Daniel, I'm even wearing his belt right now. See that? He became, I forgot to tell you about my pa, and we're back in Athens again. My pa and his brother, Hull, and when they came here and their pa, Zadok, died, well, they had to make a living. And so Zadok says, well, I think I'm just going to make shoes for a living. And you know what? He became very popular, and he traveled all around. He went out west in territory selling his shoes because he said, well, everybody has feet and everybody needs shoes. And so he hit territory that ended up being Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee, but he came back to Athens then. But my pa, Eben Foster, he came into town when he was 11, and he was on campus, the Ohio University campus, and he saw one brick building, and he fell in love with brick. And he said, I know what I'm going to do for a living. I'm going to make brick. And so that's what he ended up doing. By the time he was 29, he was an officer or a secretary or something like that in Athens, because everybody loved him. And he had brick on the streets and some brick in a couple of the little buildings on campus. And anyway, he was a fine man, but he died when he was only 33. But now we're going back to Daniel, the love of my life, whose belt this is. And Daniel, he moved to Ames, and I moved with him because we just got married. And he decided to run a general store. And you know, Ames only has one long street, and it was called Stringtown because of that one long street. And Daniel, him and a guy named Austin Dickey, so it was Brown and Dickey General Store, and they were at the very corner of that street and on the bottom floor, and they hit it off really good. Everybody loved them there, and they'd hang out, and people would come, and they'd talk politics and everything else. And he started adding on to his store, and he added on, and he added on, till it took up the whole block of Amesville. You imagine that? Well, I want to tell you this one part, and I know I've been talking too much, but this was a favorite thing, and all the town would show up to see this. So in the fall, Daniel and Dickey would build a flatboat, and they would put it in the Federal Creek, and they would start stocking up stuff like bacon and grains and tobacco and oh, what else did they have? Wool, things like that. Oh, and dried fruit, quinces too. But anyway, they would hoard all that stuff, and then in the spring, they put it all in that flatboat. And after that, they'd wait for the rains to come. And then everybody cheered when the rains would come, and the boat would start rising up, and it would go down the Federal Creek, and then it would go down to Hockey River, and then it would go down to Ohio River, down the Mississippi, and he would sell all that stuff in New Orleans. And he'd stop along the way, but he sold everything. He sold the flatboat, and then he would get on a train, him and Dickey, and they'd go up to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. And then they spent all that money that they carried in a horsehair trunk, and they had to be really careful because that was a lot of money. And they bought everything that they could think of to bring back to Athens, and not Pomeroy, Athens and Albany and Logan, and oh my, they were busy. And you know why I'm standing here today? I mean, you're probably thinking, well, she's just 100 years old, but actually I was a pioneer woman, and I came during that great migration to the territory northwest of the Ohio River, and there was a lot going on in that 100 years. And so I'm 100 years old, and I know I'm going to live to be 102, because I died in 1829, or I was born in 1827. I died in 1929, but just 7 years before that, they took my property that I was born in, and they turned it into a middle school, just like Jessica said. And then 4 years after I died, the Ames Daughters of the Revolution put a plaque on, and it's there right now. I bet you've never even noticed it. Sticking on a stone, a bronze plaque about Grandmother Brown. And then why am I telling you all this about me? Because last year when I was 99 and my family showed up, well, my daughter-in-law, Harriet, I have to look here because I can never remember that she's Connor Brown. Harriet, just another Brown. Oh, I forgot to tell you, you know my husband was so tall, dark, and handsome, my Daniel Brown, and people used to joke about him. They'd say, well, you're so dark because you have so many browns in your body. I mean, the browns dated back so far. But anyway, she said last year, Grandmother Brown, we need to write a book about this because you're a real pioneer and you made American history. So anyway, we wrote this book together, and here it is today, and it just came off the presses, and there's so much to know about what went on in those 100 years, and thank you very much.
All right. Next up, we have a young woman who had an incredible adventure when she was in her 20s, and she is here to tell you about that adventure and her time overseas in France during World War I.
Well, good evening, everyone. And my name is Flora Mason. I'm a native of Marietta, Ohio. And I want to thank you first for supporting our boys these past years when they've been fighting in France in the Great War. Now that it's 1919, right? It's 1919. Everyone's headed home, and that includes myself. So I served a year in France with the YMCA, so you can see I'm in uniform. There were thousands of YMCA men and women who went overseas because the Army was worried about morale. So a lot of these soldiers had never been so far away from home before. And then also morality. So, that far away from home, you can get into some trouble. So we did our best to keep the soldiers on the straight and narrow, which wasn't always easy, but we did our best. So my assignments tended to be at French leave areas. So when a soldier had a vacation, he couldn't go all the way back home. It would have taken weeks to get across the Atlantic. So the YMCA took over some resort towns already existing in France. So that meant that I had plenty of fun adventures. So I gave sightseeing tours of ancient ruins in Cannes. I hiked the mountains in Mount Dore. I danced the night away in La Bourboule when I wasn't playing the music, the piano for the dancers myself. And so I also can't count the number of cups of hot chocolate and cookies and donuts and sandwiches that I served in Saint Nazaire. So I crisscrossed France to serve as many American soldiers as I could, and we made home away from home for the boys. I was there to stand in for sister, for mom. At 38, I wasn't usually at risk of someone mistaking me for a sweetheart, but it did happen. So I'm back home in Marietta now, but I have a doctor from the medical corps that I happened to meet while I was overseas, and he's coming to marry me and whisk me away to Rhode Island for the rest of my life. So, but I will miss Marietta, Ohio. It's where I was born, raised. I went to Marietta College. I'm a proud 1901 alum. And that was where I started my career as a pianist and organist. And I'll probably keep that up when I go to Rhode Island. So again, thank you for your meatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays, and for donating to the United War Work campaign so that I could do my job and support the soldiers. And if you have any questions about what it was like to be a part of the war to end all wars, because there's not going to be another one after this, right? It was too terrible. Come and see me. I'll be right over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Flora. Okay, next up, we have a baseball legend who was born in Scioto County, but spent most of his later life in Nelsonville. And you may recognize his name from some of the baseball fields in Nelsonville. So please welcome Estill Crabtree.
Hi, my name's Estill Crabtree. I live at 301 4th Street in Nelsonville with my wife May and my daughter Diane. I'm in 3 Hall of Fames. The Ohio Baseball Hall of Fame, the International League Hall of Fame, and the Rochester Red Wings Hall of Fame. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. I was born in Crabtree, Ohio, just outside of Lucasville. I spent my school years in the Lucasville and Carbon Hill area. I played football, basketball, baseball in high school, but my dream was really to be a professional baseball player, major league baseball player. I pitched and caught in high school, and when I started with Dubuque in the Missouri Valley League, I also pitched. I played first base. I played the outfield. In 1929, the Cincinnati Reds bought my contract. I got one at bat that year, but they sent me down to Columbus in the American Association. And I played there for 2 years. Then they called me up. I played 2 years with the Reds, 31 and 32, and then in December of 32, they traded me to the St. Louis Cardinals. Well, the Cardinals had a pretty set outfield, and I was basically a substitute. And then May of that year, they sent me down to Rochester. Well, I stayed with Rochester for quite a long time and became captain of the team. You might remember the 1939 Governor's Cup. We were down 3-2, losing in the ninth inning with 2 outs. People were heading for the exits, but a walk, a bad hop, and then my home run tied the game up. We ended up winning in the 12th inning. The next day, 15,000 fans showed up in Rochester, 7,000 more than any other game that year, or for 6 years prior. And we won the game, so we won the Governor's Cup. In 1940, Billy Southworth, the manager, got called up to the majors, and they made me the manager of the team. Well, in June of that year, I had some bad luck. I had a collision in the outfield. I ended up losing a kidney. And obviously the rest of the season I didn't play. But I got called up by the big team in 41. Did pretty good, hit 341. And then in 42, they sent me back down to Rochester to be the manager. I spent 43 and 44 as a player coach with the Reds. And then in February of 1945, I decided, people were coming back from the war, and it was time to call it quits and go back to Nelsonville. So I went into Warren Giles' office and gave him my resignation. Came back to Nelsonville. Well, I kind of missed playing ball, And I started the old timers game that they have every year at the Parade of the Hills in Nelsonville. And they're still playing that game today. They had the 75th anniversary last year. So I guess I'll go back to my house at 301 4th Street.
Thank you, Estel. Okay, last but not least, here's someone that I think many of you might know. He is a forester and a teacher, and he has served with the Department of Forestry for his entire career. And in his retirement, spent a lot of time tracing Native American trails and writing. So I would like to introduce you to Emmett Conway Sr.
Well, thank you. I'm Emmett Conway, and you can find out a lot about me by going to my website, www.oldforester.com, and old is spelled with an E. and it's I think my son has taken over managing the website, but it's still there. And I was my twin brother Eric and I were born in Gloucester in 1914. I grew up outside of a town near Youngstown, and I was in the Boy Scouts and earned the Eagle rank. I went to college in Youngstown for a couple years, and then I found this something else that took my fancy, forestry. So I went to the University of Michigan, graduated there in 1939 in forestry and conservation. I came back to Ohio. I met my wife, Myrtle, love of my life, and then I worked in Youngstown as a forester in their park for a couple years, and then joined the Division of Forestry. I was the manager at Lake Hope Park and Zaleski State Forest. I managed both of them because at the time there was no divisional parks. There was only the Division of Forestry, and forestry took care of everything. After that, a few years, and then I did a inventory. I was assigned to do the inventory on every state forest in the state of Ohio. And it took me several years to do it. I would take out my aerial photographs on my cruise. I would take my Biltmore stick to measure volume. I would have my increment board to figure out what the growth rate of the trees. And I made a management report for every state forest in the state. So it was quite a job. And I figured I hiked 500 miles in doing this job. After that, I worked for D.B. Frampton Lumber Company out of MacArthur, Vinton County. They had quite a bit of property in Vinton County, and part of it I worked with the U.S. Forest Service, and we established the Vinton Furnace Experimental Forest. And this was forestry and natural resources research that was done there for many years and continues to be. From after that, I worked for Ohio University and on tourism information, and part of that is tried to develop ideas to increase tourism in the natural resources field. Then I retired, and after I retired, I decided I got very interested in trails and antique trails of the world. So I went and researched it, and in Ohio, I started tried to find and locate all the old Indian trails. There's quite a few in Ohio, and so I got them on the ground, mapped them, and for Indian trails, the Indians they wanted something that was dry, they wanted it level, and they wanted it direct. And so, which in most cases, that means you're up in the ridge top where it's dry, level, and direct, not in the bottomlands where it's usually quite wet and swampy and hard to get through. And the pioneers, when they came, they used some of these Indian trails, and was the main one that they used that I researched is the Hopewell Chillicothe Marietta Indian Trail road, I should say, going from Chillicothe through Athens to Marietta. And if you go out west of Athens on Vore Ridge Road, going to Carbondale, that is pretty much the location of this ancient Indian trail and the more modern road. So that's, and I'll be up after everybody talks. I'll be upstairs, and so if you want more information about Emmett Conway, I'll be happy to talk to you.
All right. Well, that is all of our interpreters. So now what we are going to do is, if you would like to wander around at your own pace, you are more than welcome to find our interpreters. They are all over the museum. We have 2 upstairs in our library. 1, Estill Crabtree, is in our reception area. And then we have the other 5 down in this main area. Or if you would like to be guided, we have some volunteers who can meet you, and we'll be right back here. We have 2 volunteers, and I'll be leading another group. So if you would like to have a guided tour through our interpreters, you are more than welcome. I just love that we have everyone from 1730 all the way up to the era of websites. So thank you to our interpreters, and I hope you explore and get to know them a little better.
U.S. Capitol building at age 80. I stood up to oppose a couple. Somebody recommended that we give medals to these generals who invaded Mexico, and I thought that's not us. We are not an imperialist nation. We don't award people for invading other countries, and I stood up to oppose that, and I had a stroke. And I was supported in that motion by a young freshman congressman from Illinois named Abe something, and I forget his last name. And he also helped me to the other room in the speaker's office where I croaked the next day.
Yeah, she's one that's player coach. He'll be probably big.
Yes.